Jeff Karpot, leave the inspection folder on the table.
We move units constantly. That folder tracks the yard.
The same generator was presented as different inventory.
This is Sergei Volkov, owner of State Line Movers in Orlando, Florida. Once is a mistake, twice is a scheme. He did this to dozens of families across 2 years, and every single one of them handed him their entire life first.
Or your people counted equipment during a relocation.
VIN stickers were swapped before investor inspection.
You're turning a messy operation into $1 billion lie.
She stood in the parking lot of a Days Inn on Elm Hill Pike in Nashville with 2 children, a border collie, and $48 in her checking account. Her furniture, her clothing, her son's asthma medication, and her daughter's baby photos were sitting in a warehouse in Orange County, Florida. To get them back, she was told, she would need to wire $11,480. The signed contract in her purse said $3,210. Within 6 months, that woman's Facebook post would trigger a state investigation that unmasked a 2-year pattern of extortion, expose a warehouse holding the household belongings of 41 families, and put Sergei Volkov in the Orange County Jail on charges carrying a maximum potential exposure of 30 years in a Florida state prison. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever handed over everything you own to a stranger and just trusted they would bring it back? Drop your story in the comments. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We hold predators like this one accountable every single week. Sergei Andreevich Volkov was born in Volgograd, in the south of Russia, in June of 1980. The city had been called Stalingrad within his grandfather's lifetime, and the shadow of that name still hung over every neighborhood. His father, Andrei Volkov, was a diesel mechanic for a state trucking cooperative. His mother, Tatiana, worked as a bookkeeper at a fabric warehouse. They lived in a 5th-floor Khrushchevka apartment with concrete walls, a single-burner gas stove, and a balcony that looked out over the Volga River in the summer haze. Sergei was 6 years old when his father first brought him to the trucking yard. He would remember the smell of diesel more clearly than any other detail of his childhood. That thick, oily smell clung to his father's coveralls and never fully washed out of the fabric. By the time he was 10, he could identify a Kamaz, a Zil, and a Maz by engine sound alone. His father let him ride in the cab on short runs and taught him how to check fluid levels and how to lash cargo down to a bed with rope. The Soviet Union collapsed when Sergei was 11 years old. The trucking cooperative dissolved within a year. His father spent the next 2 years without steady work, taking piecework repairs at a garage in the industrial district. The family ate cabbage soup for weeks at a stretch. Tatiana sold her wedding ring at a pawn shop on Sovetskaya Street to cover the electricity bill in the winter of 1993. Sergei never forgot the day his mother came home without the ring. At 17, in the spring of 1997, an uncle sponsored Sergei's passage to the United States. He arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport with $240 in cash, sewn into the lining of a canvas jacket and a single duffel bag. His uncle owned a small moving company operating out of a leased garage on Neptune Avenue in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, servicing the Russian-speaking neighborhoods along the Atlantic corridor. Sergei was put to work the day after he landed. His starting wage was $6 an hour, cash. He loaded trucks in the heat of Brooklyn summers and in the ice of Brooklyn winters. He learned how to wrap furniture in blankets and secure it with rubber bands, how to disassemble a bed frame without stripping the bolts, how to angle a sofa through a doorway that was 2 inches narrower than the sofa was wide. He learned which apartment buildings on Ocean Avenue had freight elevators and which ones did not. He learned that on a good day, a strong mover could earn as much in cash tips as in wages if the customer was pleased at the end of the load. Sergei married Marina Kuznetsova, a dental assistant from Odessa, in the spring of 2005 at a small courthouse ceremony in Kings County. They rented a 1-bedroom on Brighton 4th Street above a Russian pharmacy. Their daughter Anya was born at Coney Island Hospital in 2007. Their son Maxim was born in the same hospital in 2010. In the fall of 2011, with 2 young children and no room to grow in Brooklyn, the Volkovs relocated to Orlando, Florida. Sergey's cousin operated an auto body shop in Pine Hills and had told him the moving industry in Central Florida was expanding faster than the local labor pool could supply it. The family drove down over 3 days in a used Chrysler minivan packed with everything they owned. Sergey was 31 years old. For his first 4 years in Orlando, Sergey worked as a lead mover for a large regional company called Sunshine Relocation Services, based on John Young Parkway. He drove crews out of Orlando, Tampa, and Jacksonville. He earned Employee of the Quarter recognition 3 separate times. Customers wrote thank you notes to the office about him. His supervisor described him in a 2013 evaluation as an exceptionally hard worker, dependable, professional with customers, and comfortable in leadership roles. By the fall of 2015, Sergey had saved $62,000. He had a commercial driver's license, a book of contacts up and down the East Coast, and a reputation. That October, he registered State Line Movers, LLC, with the Florida Division of Corporations. He listed the principal address as a rented industrial unit off Silver Star Road in West Orange County. He bought his first truck at a fleet auction in Sanford, a used 26-foot Freightliner with 380,000 miles on the odometer, priced at $11,000. He painted the company name on the sides himself, in white block letters over the original faded blue. Marina managed the phones from a folding desk in their spare bedroom. Sergey worked the loads. In the first year, State Line Movers completed 84 jobs and cleared a gross revenue of $191,000. Sergey drove every single move himself. For the first 2 years of its operation, State Line Movers was, by every visible measure, a legitimate small business. Sergey showed up on time. He wrapped furniture properly. He wrote apologetic notes on company letterhead when a crew scratched a wall. He hired 2 full-time laborers, Nikolai Petrov and Dmitry Sokolov, both Russian-speaking immigrants who trusted him because he had once been standing exactly where they now stood. But the moving industry in Florida operated on a foundation that made a very specific kind of fraud almost effortless to commit, and Sergey watched that foundation from the inside for a long time before he ever exploited a single crack in it. Household moves in the United States are structured around a single moment of total customer vulnerability. When a family relocates, everything they own, every photograph, every heirloom, every piece of furniture, every article of clothing, every child's toy, is packed into boxes and loaded onto a truck belonging to a company they met, in most cases, through a 5-minute phone call and a website. From the moment the tailgate closes until the moment the truck backs up to their new home and the ramp goes down, the customer has no possessions. They are living in hotels or on a friend's couch or in an empty new house with nothing but suitcases and takeout containers. Their entire material life is inside somebody else's rented truck. That truck can, in theory, go anywhere. It can be driven to any warehouse in any state. It can be parked behind any gate. It can be held. Florida licenses intrastate movers through the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services under Chapter 507 of the state statutes. Interstate movers fall under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration out of Washington. Both frameworks require a written estimate, a bill of lading, and a signed inventory. Both prohibit the practice of demanding payment beyond the good faith estimate as a condition of releasing a customer's household goods. That practice has a specific name in the industry. It is called hostage load fraud. But the enforcement gap is enormous. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration had, at the peak of the years Sergey operated, roughly 300 field inspectors nationwide to oversee a moving industry of more than 7,000 licensed interstate carriers and an unknown number of unlicensed operators working under paper company names. Florida's state-level enforcement office handled complaints reactively, not proactively. A customer who had already paid a ransom and gotten their belongings back was told they could file a civil suit at their own expense. A customer who refused to pay was told the state could not compel the release of goods that were, on paper, the subject of a private contract dispute. Sergey understood this. He had watched other Russian-owned moving companies in Brighton Beach get away with variations of the same scheme for years without a single indictment. The pattern was simple, and the enforcement was almost non-existent, and the customers, at the critical moment of leverage, were stranded 800 miles from their possessions with nothing to negotiate with. The first inflated invoice at State Line Movers, according to the state's charging affidavit, was issued on February 12, 2022. The customer was a retired middle school teacher named Beverly Henshaw, 68 years old, relocating from a two-bedroom bungalow in Kissimmee to a senior apartment in Asheville, North Carolina. Sergey quoted her $3,450, based on an estimated load weight of 8,200 pounds and a line haul distance of 560 highway miles. Beverly signed the estimate on the morning of February 8th. Sergey's crew loaded her house on the morning of the 12th. The truck was closed. The doors were sealed. Sergey then handed Beverly a revised invoice on a clipboard. The new total was $7,940. The added line items included a long carry surcharge of $900, a stairs surcharge of $600, a shrink wrap and specialty packing fee of $1,200, and a fuel adjustment of $580. Beverly's driveway was flat. Her house was single-story. She had wrapped her own dishes in newspaper the night before. She told Sergey she did not have that money, not in her checking account, not anywhere. Sergey told her, calmly, in his lightly accented English, that the truck would return to their warehouse in Orlando, and her belongings would remain there until the invoice was resolved. He told her he understood it was a difficult situation. He told her he had a family too. He gave her his personal cell phone number and told her to call him when she could pay. Beverly Henshaw paid the $7,940 9 days later, wiring the funds from her nephew's account in Charlotte. Her belongings were delivered to the senior apartment in Asheville 48 hours after the wire cleared her account. Investigators would later identify Beverly's move as the pilot run. Sergey told no one on the crew what he had done. Nikolai and Dmitry drove the truck back to the Silver Star warehouse and unloaded Beverly's belongings into a numbered bay. They assumed the customer was simply late paying. That assumption held for the next 2 years. Over the 24 months that followed, State Line Movers would repeat the pattern approximately 62 times, according to the state's charging affidavit. The methodology tightened with practice. Sergey preferred long-distance interstate moves, particularly those crossing 2 or more state lines. A customer whose belongings were sitting in a warehouse 800 miles from where they now lived had no realistic path to physically recovering their property. The distance itself was the leverage. Distance kept lawyers slow. Distance kept insurance adjusters uncertain. Distance kept the customer negotiating from a hotel room. He targeted customers who booked online without ever meeting him in person. He preferred customers whose email addresses ended in .edu, .gov, or an employer domain, because they were more likely to have institutional credit and less likely to walk away from their belongings and eat the loss. He preferred customers with young children or elderly parents, because their timeline pressure was highest and their patience shortest. He avoided customers who mentioned attorneys, insurance adjusters, or corporate relocation benefits during the initial booking call. Those callers received a polite quote and then a follow-up email saying his crews were unavailable for the requested dates. The pretextual line items rotated between jobs, so no 2 invoices looked identical. Long carry surcharges, elevator wait time, piano and safe handling fees applied to customers who did not own pianos or safes. Bulk item surcharges applied to standard couches, weight redistribution fees, fuel volatility adjustments pegged to no published index. Every invoice was different enough to look bespoke and similar enough to hint, in retrospect, at a template. The warehouse on Silver Star Road filled up. Sergey rented a second bay in early 2023, then a third in the fall of that year. By the summer of 2024, the leased warehouse space totaled 11,200 square feet, and roughly a third of it was occupied by the household goods of customers who were still, at that moment, in the middle of negotiating their ransoms from motel rooms in other states. Marina, working the phones from the home office, took the calls when customers pushed back on the invoices. She was trained. She was polite. She used the phrase, "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but this is between you and Sergey's team. I only handle scheduling." She routed the calls back to Sergey, who told the customers, in his patient voice, that he was doing everything he could, but the invoice was the invoice, and the fuel was the fuel. Anya and Maxim, now 16 and 13, did their homework at the kitchen table in a 5-bedroom house in the Dr. Phillips neighborhood, purchased in cash in April of 2023. The purchase price was $840,000. Marina drove a new Lexus RX. Sergey drove a 2-year-old GMC Yukon Denali. Anya took private tennis lessons at the Bay Hill Club on Saturday mornings. On the morning of October 3, 2024, a 34-year-old woman named Jessica Marchetti sat on a plastic chair in the lobby of a Days Inn on Elm Hill Pike in Nashville, Tennessee, and typed a Facebook post from her phone. She had booked State Line Movers on September 14th to relocate her family from a rental in Winter Garden, Florida, to a 3-bedroom house in Franklin, Tennessee. Her husband, Ryan, had accepted a position at a healthcare software company outside Nashville. The signed estimate was $3,210, based on a listed weight of 6,800 pounds. She had wired a $500 deposit on September 18th. Sergey's crew loaded her house on the afternoon of October 1st. The truck sealed at approximately 6:15 that evening. Sergey was not present at the load itself. Nikolai Petrov handed Jessica the revised invoice from the driver's seat of the truck. The new total was $11,480. Nikolai told her, in halting English, that Mr. Volkov would call her about the payment. He drove away. The Marchettis had already surrendered the keys to their Winter Garden rental. They had 2 children under the age of 7, a border collie named Boone, and a Toyota Highlander. They drove to Nashville over the next 2 days, expecting the truck to meet them at their new address on the morning of October 3rd. On the morning of the 3rd, Sergey called Jessica from a Central Florida area code. He told her the delivery was on hold, pending resolution of the fuel and weight adjustments. He told her he would need the full balance, $11,480, wired to a business account before the truck would leave the Orlando warehouse. Jessica told him she did not have that money. She was a schoolteacher. Her husband's new job had not paid its first check yet. They had spent nearly everything on the deposit for the Franklin house and on the drive up. Sergey told her, in the same calm voice he had used with Beverly Henshaw 20 months earlier, that he understood, that he had a family too, and that her belongings would remain in the Orlando warehouse until she resolved the invoice. Jessica hung up the phone. She sat in the Days Inn parking lot for 40 minutes. Boone panted in the back seat. Her 7-year-old daughter, Ellie, asked her 3 separate times when they were going to see her stuffed animals again. Then Jessica wrote a Facebook post. The post was long. It named the company. It attached photographs of the signed estimate and the revised invoice, side by side, held next to each other on the dashboard of the Highlander. It described the 2 children, the dog, the empty new house, and the $48 in her checking account. She posted it publicly at 10:47 in the morning on October 3rd, 2024. She tagged 3 local news outlets in Nashville, 2 in Orlando, and the Office of Florida's Attorney General. By 9 the following morning, the post had been shared 23,000 times. By noon, it had crossed 60,000. And in the comments, something started happening that Jessica had not anticipated when she hit publish. Other people began telling their own stories. A software engineer in Raleigh who had paid $9,400 against a $3,000 quote in July of 2023. A widow in Savannah who had paid $12,200 against a $4,000 quote in January of 2024, using her late husband's life insurance settlement to cover the balance. A newlywed couple in Columbus, Ohio, who had abandoned their belongings entirely because they could not afford the ransom demanded, and who had spent the last 11 months watching their wedding photographs, their gifts, and their furniture disappear into a warehouse they had never seen. By the evening of October 4th, the comments section of Jessica's post contained 61 identifiable victim accounts. A staff investigator at the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, monitoring consumer complaint traffic that afternoon, read the post at 5:20 in the evening. She flagged it up her chain of command that same night. The case was formally assigned on October 7th to a joint task force pulling investigators from the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the Orange County Sheriff's Office Economic Crimes Unit, and a fraud specialist detailed from the Florida Attorney General's office. Lead investigator was Detective Rachel Alvarado, a 15-year veteran of the Sheriff's Economic Crimes Division who had worked contractor fraud and elder abuse cases across Central Florida since 2009. Alvarado's first move was to subpoena the customer records of State Line Movers, LLC. The subpoena was served on the registered agent on October 9th. Marina Volkov surrendered a partial paper archive from the home office on October 11th and told investigators, on advice of a hastily retained attorney, that Sergey kept the primary business records at the Silver Star warehouse. On October 15th, Alvarado obtained a search warrant for the warehouse. The warrant was executed at 7:14 in the morning on October 16th, 2024. What investigators found inside the warehouse would become the defining image of the case. Bay 1 contained 23 household loads, each tagged with a customer surname handwritten on white cardstock and stacked to the ceiling on wooden pallets. Bay 2 contained an additional 14 loads. Bay 3 contained 4 more loads and a gray metal filing cabinet pushed against the back wall. The filing cabinet held the smoking gun. Inside it, in green hanging folders labeled by month and year, were the signed customer estimates. Beside each estimate, clipped together with a black metal binder clip, were the revised final invoices for that same job. In every folder, the two numbers were different. The estimates were signed and dated on the day of booking. The invoices were dated the day of loading. The average ratio between the two documents was 2.7 to 1. On some individual jobs, the ratio climbed to 3.8 to 1. Detective Alvarado photographed every folder in the cabinet. 41 of the customer files matched belongings physically present in the warehouse that morning. The remainder had been resolved, meaning the customer had, at some point over the preceding 2 years, paid the ransom and taken possession of their goods. Investigators cross-referenced the bank records of State Line Movers, LLC, and of a personal account held jointly by Sergey and Marina Volkov at Fifth Third Bank on Sand Lake Road. Over the 2-year period beginning January 2022 and ending October 2024, the two accounts received wire deposits totaling $483,000 in excess of the signed estimate amounts. That figure was the state's initial working estimate of the ransom proceeds. It would climb steadily during the ongoing investigation. We are about to walk into the courtroom. Before we do, if you have made it this far, that is because this story deserved to be told properly. Subscribe if you agree. Cases like this one do not get the coverage they deserve, and this channel does not look away from them. Text messages recovered from Sergey's iPhone, pulled under the same search warrant, contain the second layer of evidence. Sergey to Nikolai, June 14, 2023, 11:42 p.m. Load 47 signed at 4200. Do not release. I will call her tomorrow with new number. Sergey to Nikolai, September 3, 2023, 8:14 a.m. Widow, Savannah. Tell her wait was over. Do not answer if she calls tonight. Sergey to Marina, February 22, 2024, 2:07 p.m. Tell Raleigh guy I am in meeting. Wire not received. Call tomorrow. He pay. Sergey to Nikolai, August 8, 2024, 6:33 p.m. New rule. No release without wire cleared. No exceptions. I am tired of chasing. There were more than 400 messages in the same voice, the same casual, unmistakable pattern, spread across a group thread that included Marina and both crew members. The state's forensic analyst assembled them into a 290-page exhibit. Detective Alvarado obtained a warrant for Sergey's arrest on October 24, 2024. Deputies with the Orange County Sheriff's Office and investigators from the Attorney General's Task Force served the warrant at the Volkov residence in Dr. Phillips at 6:42 in the morning on October 25, 2024. Sergei answered the door in a gray t-shirt and dark blue athletic pants. He was holding a mug of coffee in his right hand. Marina stood a few feet behind him in the tiled hallway, wrapped in a robe. Anya and Maxime were still asleep upstairs. Detective Alvarado presented the warrant. Body cameras were rolling from 3 separate angles. Alvarado: Mr. Volkov, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of extortion, grand theft, and violation of Florida's Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act. I need you to step outside and turn around, please. Sergei looked at the warrant for a long moment. He set the coffee mug on a small table by the door. He looked past Alvarado at the deputies on his front lawn, at the 2 unmarked vehicles in his driveway, at the neighbor across the street standing on his porch in a bathrobe. Sergei: This is a business dispute. This is a civil matter. Alvarado: Sir, please turn around. Sergei: My customers signed contracts. If they did not read them, that is not my problem. This is a business. Alvarado: Mr. Volkov, turn around and place your hands behind your back. He did. He was calm. He did not resist the cuffs. As Alvarado tightened them, he turned his head slightly. Sergei: Am I allowed to speak to my wife? Alvarado: Not right now, sir. You can call her from processing. Sergei: Detective, my customers. They signed the contract. They signed for the weight. The weight was different at the truck. This is not a crime. This is a fee. Every mover has fees. Alvarado did not respond. She walked him down the paved driveway. Marina stood in the doorway with one hand pressed flat against the frame, and the other holding a phone she had not yet used to call an attorney. She did not follow him out. Sergei's last words before the deputy closed the door of the patrol vehicle were spoken over his shoulder, to no one in particular. Sergei: I want to speak to my lawyer. Sergei Andreevich Volkov was booked into the Orange County Jail on 33rd Street at 8:14 in the morning on October 25, 2024. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and processed on 29 total counts. The charging document filed by the State Attorney's Office for the 9th Judicial Circuit of Florida included 8 counts of extortion under Florida Statute 836. 5. A second-degree felony carrying up to 15 years per count. 14 counts of grand theft in the first degree under Florida Statute 812. 014. Based on individual customer losses exceeding $100,000 in aggregate. 4 counts of a scheme to defraud under Florida Statute 817. 034. 3 counts of violation of Florida's Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act under Chapter 501. The maximum potential exposure, if the counts were run consecutively, was calculated by the State Attorney's Office at approximately 30 years in state prison. That figure is not a projection of what Sergei will receive. The case remains pre-trial as of this filing. In Florida, sentences on counts of this kind typically run concurrently for a first-time offender with no violent history, though the state has publicly indicated it intends to seek an upward departure based on the number of victims and the sustained duration of the scheme. First appearance was held on October 26th before Judge Marlon Ferrer at the Orange County Courthouse on Orange Avenue. Bond was initially set at $250,000. Defense counsel Anthony DeLisi of the DeLisi and Marek firm in Winter Park argued for release on recognizance, citing Sergei's family ties in Central Florida, his lack of criminal history, and his ownership of a paid-off primary residence. The state attorney presented a bond argument built entirely on victim exposure. 10 victims had traveled to Orlando or dialed in remotely for the hearing. Beverly Henshaw, the retired teacher from the February 2022 move, spoke first. She was 70 years old. She addressed the court from a wheelchair, wearing a lavender cardigan and holding a folded sheet of yellow legal pad paper in her lap. Beverly: Your Honor, I paid this man almost $8,000 I did not have to get back the belongings I have spent my whole life collecting. I did it because I was scared. I did it because I did not know what else to do. My son is deceased. I have no husband. I have very little family. Those boxes were everything I had left of my life before Florida. I want the court to know that I am one of dozens. I want the court to know that some of us are still waiting for our things. Jessica Marchetti spoke next, appearing by video from Franklin, Tennessee. She held her 7-year-old daughter, Ellie, on her lap during her statement. Jessica, my daughter is asking me every night when her stuffed animals are coming home. Her name is written on a box in a warehouse in Orlando. She has been sleeping without them for 3 weeks. My son needs his medication and the belongings that this man is holding. This is not a business dispute. This is a hostage situation. I want the court to understand what he did to us in that Days Inn parking lot. Judge Ferrer revoked the initial bond figure and set a new bond at $750,000, requiring surrender of the passport and GPS ankle monitoring as conditions of release. Sergei posted the bond on October 30th through a bail bondsman on Colonial Drive, securing it against the Dr. Phillips home. He was released to house arrest pending trial. The case is currently docketed for a case management conference in the spring of 2025, with a trial date to be set thereafter. Discovery is ongoing. The state is continuing to identify additional victims through the public complaint portal established by the Attorney General's office. As of the most recent filing, the confirmed victim count stood at 68 households, with a total confirmed loss figure of $612,000. The Silver Star warehouse remains under state control. 41 customer loads are still being cataloged, photographed, and released to their rightful owners. Some customers have driven from as far as Michigan and Vermont to reclaim their possessions in person, and have wept in the loading bay when they opened boxes they had not seen in more than a year. State Line Movers, LLC, has been administratively dissolved by the Florida Department of State. Its trucks have been seized. The registration on the 26-foot Freightliner that Sergei painted white by hand in the fall of 2015 has been permanently suspended by the state. Marina Volkov has not, as of this filing, been charged with any offense. She remains at the Dr. Phillips home with the 2 children. Neighbors report the family has not left the property, other than for court dates and school pickup, since the day of the arrest. Sergei's trial, when it comes, will be one of the largest hostage load fraud prosecutions in Florida history. The signed estimates in that filing cabinet did not just document what he charged, they documented what he promised. He offered 41 families a price, and when he had their entire life sealed inside his truck, he named a new one. This case was disturbing, but the case waiting for you on the right-hand side is worse. Click it now.